The Amos Fortune Forum is now in session. I want to welcome you all. My name is Brad Smith. This is the seventh and final presentation of our 2023 season. We've got a really nice full house. I'm glad to see all of you here. And I want to say a special thank you and hello to everyone who was at the dedication ceremony just back here prior to this. And a special hello to our friends who have come from near and far and from the Black Heritage Trail, New Hampshire. It's great to have you here. And a special shout out to Owen Houghton. I know that he has put a lot of time and energy into working with a lot of different groups to make this happen. So Owen, thank you very much. As I do every week, I want to sincerely thank everyone who has made donations and contributions to the forum, as well as our corporate and our business sponsors. As you know, it's free, it's open to everyone, and it's been that way since the beginning in 1946, and we plan to keep it that way. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. If you haven't had an opportunity to donate yet, we try and make that as simple as possible for you. There are our begging bowls at each of the doors. If you would prefer, you can also go to our website and make a donation there. We have cards on the benches there that have our website address, also the QR code if you want to sort of do a shortcut right to the website. I also want to say thank you to Ellen Widmer, one of our forum committee members. She puts in a tremendous amount of time, week in and week out, and she has also sponsored the beautiful bouquet of flowers you see here on stage this evening. Thank you, Ellen. And I'd also like to thank Jill Tyler and Sarah Isaacs and Kathy McCloy, who have been working hard at putting our reception together. Immediately following the presentation this evening, we invite all of you to join us next door at the church for some light refreshments, to catch up with friends, to meet our speaker, to ask her questions that you didn't get to ask during the presentation this evening. So please plan on joining. So with that, I am really pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Jennifer Gruda. In her White House speech upon being confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson thanked a number of people for supporting her throughout her career, as well as a grueling confirmation process. Among them, she specifically thanked God, her family, the President, Justice Stephen Breyer, and our speaker this evening, Jen Gruda. That's pretty good company and well-deserved, I'm absolutely sure. We all want our children to grow up in a safe, supportive atmosphere, just like here in Jaffrey. Then we want them to pursue their dreams, full of confidence and capability to go out and make their imprint on the world. Jen grew up in Jaffrey. She attended Conant. She went on to Brandeis, graduating summa cum laude, and then went on to Georgetown, where she graduated magna cum laude and got her law degree. By the way, these are words that you would never see on my resume. After practicing in the litigation department of a prestigious DC law firm, she began working for Justice Jackson in 2013. During her tenure on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, and she supported Justice Jackson through nomination and confirmation processes for appointments to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit and later the Supreme Court of the United States. Jen currently serves as Senior Judicial Assistant to Associate Justice Jackson, who joined the Supreme Court last year. By my definition, that constitutes going out and making an imprint on the world. The other thing we all want our children to do is to come home. And while Jen is incredibly busy in DC with any manner of important work, she has graciously carved out time to come back to Jaffrey and share with us this evening her journey, her experiences, and some behind-the-bench insights on the workings of the highest court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, quote, "It's hard not to have a big year at the Supreme Court." This past year has been no exception. I'm sure that we will be the richer for our time spent this evening with Jen, so I am incredibly pleased to introduce our presenter, Jen Gruda.
Right there. Okay, great. I'm actually gonna... Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for that welcome. As Brad said, my name is Jen Gruda, and I'm a lawyer by training, and my current job is as the Senior Judicial Assistant to the 116th Associate Justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, Ketanji Brown Jackson. I am absolutely thrilled to be here tonight as part of the Amos Fortune Speaker Series, and also to help celebrate our town's 250th anniversary. My plan originally was actually to head on home tomorrow morning, but now I see there's a parade for the Jaffrey Jubilee, which I was in the parade when I was a kid, and I was on the baseball team in the Savernettes, and we had this float, and you had popcorn balls that we were throwing. Anyway, Joey, we're leaving late because we're staying for the parade. He's not gonna like that. So I have to say that I was shocked when my high school swim coach, Miss CK, who's in the back, and actually it's Margie Clark Cavan, but old habits die hard, even after 30 years. So I was so surprised when she reached out to me and asked me to speak tonight. This series has been a host to so many luminaries, and I am beyond honored to be among them and speaking with you tonight. So thank you to Margie and to other members of the selection committee for giving me and my kids a reason to escape from DC this weekend. Thank you to Brad for that lovely welcome. I was shocked, actually, when the justice said my name when we were at the White House. And I was sitting on the lawn, and she looked over at me, and then the president and the vice president looked over at me, and I was like, oh my God, this is, whew. Okay. So thank you everyone who's here tonight, and also thank you to everyone who is watching online. I had a few friends reach out to me who said that they couldn't be here, so I'm really happy that there's an online option, even if it means I'm gonna be on YouTube forever. So hope the hair is not too crazy. I understand also that there's a recycled percussion concert going on tonight, so I am honored that you chose to come and listen to me be a law dork for a little bit. At the outset, I feel like I need to come a little clean. So my mom forwarded me some of the news articles, and some of them said that I was a native of Jaffrey, and actually my family moved here. Oh, so sorry, there's me with the justice. And then, yeah, we had a cookout. She flipped some burgers. It was pretty cool. So I actually moved to Jaffrey the summer before I started 4th grade. But I promise you that I still have the Jaffrey bona fides. There we go. 1990, St. Pat's. Most of the rest of my immediate family is still local, and you've probably seen them around town. My mom, Shirley, my dad, Ray, and my stepmom, Mary. My brother Joe is over there as well. And then Walt and his wife Jess. My niece, Hannah Leese, who's up in the balcony up there with my kids, spent a good deal of time here in Ringe before going off to college to hang out with people who are way more fun than me and my brothers and my parents. My older brother, Ray, lived here until about 6 months ago, so I hope you don't hold it against me that he joined me in leaving town, but hopefully he'll still come back. Anyway, so St. Pat's from 4th to 8th grade. Back in the day, I remember that the bank on Main Street was called the Monadnock Bank, and there was the big Christmas tree, tree on the lawn of the library that was lit up for Christmas, and the fire trucks came and we had hot chocolate and Santa Claus. I attended Conant for high school, and I was involved in the typical swath of extracurricular and community activities. I was a volunteer state gate guard for the Friends of Recreation. And does anyone, I don't know if anyone else here remembers, probably not, but you would skate around for like couple skate, oh, Jill, yeah, hold hands in the dark. Mr. Stone, John Stone, who was here tonight, towards the back, he was the head of Friends of Recreation at the time, and my mom told me that you chose to come here instead of recycled percussion, so thank you very much. I was on the swim team for 4 years, which is how I first met Miss CK. That's our picture senior year over at the Clark. I actually joined the team when it was in its infancy. She maybe had started it a year or two before, and I am proud to say that during our senior year, we won our first ever swim meet. I understand that since then, Miss CK has went on to develop some really, really great swimmers. So, pictures. So yeah, we had track and field. Oh yeah. There is senior year, so I was on the student council. That's Zach Wright and I, who was the president. I was the vice president. And that was the class of 93's graduation. I understand they're having their reunion tonight, 30 years, which is a little crazy. Oh, Jill, you're in that picture. Sorry, I didn't, I didn't forewarn you. Let's see. What do we have here? Oh yeah, there's some us in the typical kind of Gen X 90s gear hanging out in the hallway. There's me and my best friend, Beck Conway Gagnon, at graduation. And then, here we go, high school yearbook. Found it this weekend when I was cleaning out my office before coming down here. I mean, the poof. How did I get my hair to stay up like that? I don't know, hairspray, but when I was in high school, Market Basket first opened. We had the 5-way stop downtown instead of the lights. In fact, I remember when I would travel places, I would tell them that we only had one light in town, which was the blinking red light that used, I don't know if it's still out here, but there was a blinking red light near Jaffrey Center. We had donuts at Mrs. Murphy's, and the evening entertainment was cruising, so you would get in the car and drive around and stop at like the Bell Tate's parking lot and go to Conant. The late Jeff Ross, the former business teacher at Conant, gave me my first job scooping ice cream at Addison's, which was the restaurant ice cream place that followed Silver Ranch but preceded present-day Kimball's. Anyway, so thank you for humoring me for this trip down memory lane, and I hope that you will still count me as one of your own. So when the committee asked me to talk, they said I needed to submit a summary. And I said, I'm going to cover 3 things. Cover my path from Jaffrey to the Supreme Court, kind of give you all an overview of the workings of the federal court system, and then go into the fun stuff, the process for selecting federal judges, and my justice's confirmation process. So I've already talked a lot about myself, so I'll just briefly touch on my career path. After graduation, I made my way down Route 2 and 95 to Brandeis University in Waltham. And this was actually at the recommendation of one of my favorite teachers from high school who taught me English in 10th and 12th grade, who's actually here tonight. I didn't know she was coming, Miss Margolis. So she kind of inspired me to go to Brandeis. And honestly, and she's probably gonna cry, like that was the start of my path to where I am today. So thank you, Miss Margolis, and thank you for coming. So after that, I went, as Brad mentioned, I went to Georgetown University Law Center for law school, and I had every intention of coming back to New England once law school was done. And I joke now that inertia took over, because when it came time to figure out what I was going to do after graduation, I said, well, if I go to Boston, I have to find a job and a place to live. But if I stay in DC, I only have to find a job. And that seemed a whole lot easier. So I did, I stayed. Life took over from there, and now I live in Arlington with my 2 kids, Adam and Zachary, who are upstairs with their headphones and their phones and their headphones because, they are teenagers, so I am eminently uncool. And Adam regularly tells me that I'm either embarrassing him or that, he's all done talking to me. And he didn't really understand why we were flying to New Hampshire and why people wanted to hear me talk about my work, because to him it is nothing special at all. He was a 7th grader last year, and he had social studies class. And one of the topics was the government and the federal system. And so I saw this on the syllabus, and I got really excited because we've been coming out of COVID, and he's asking me for help with math, and they teach math in a very different way than when I was in school. So I'm watching the videos with him to try to learn the math lesson so that I could teach it to him at the same time. I'm like, oh, Supreme Court, federalism. This is me, I'm in my element. So I said, hey buddy, if you need some help with your homework this week, just let me know. And he looked at me and was like, eh. I'm like, oh, okay. So the end of the time allotted for the unit comes by, and I said, how did it go learning about the Supreme Court? And now anyone who's had a tween or a teen, you know the answer that I got. Fine. I said, here we go. I'm like, did you tell them that you'd been to the court before? That we'd gone for the Christmas party? There he is with my au pair Leo. They're got the treats. There he is with the boss. We had a Halloween party. They took him trick-or-treating. I'm like, did you tell them about this? And he was like, nah, I forgot. Okay. So the rest of my family holds me in a little bit higher esteem. I gave my dad a Supreme Court coffee mug for Christmas, and he said that he would proudly display it on his shelf, but that he wouldn't use it because he didn't want to ruin it. My mom loves showing her water aerobics friends at the Clark the pictures that I send her from the court. And my brother Walt, well, when we were in the midst of the Senate meetings for the Supreme Court confirmation, he sent me this message, this picture. And I don't know if you can see, at the upper right corner, that's me. Oh, sorry, I leaned in way too far. He somehow recognized me, just that little corner of my head, as I was literally power walking down the Senate hallways, trying my best to hide behind the security guards so that I wouldn't end up in a picture. But yeah, good times. Anyway, so back to my timeline. Since I graduated from law school a little over 20 years ago, I have worked for only 2 employers, which nowadays seems kind of strange, I think. I worked at a large law firm in DC named Crowell & Mooring, and also for the United States court system. So in my 10 years at the firm, I worked for a bunch of large companies, basically doing class action defense, mainly in products liability cases, and environmental toxic torts, which are they're Aaron Brockovich cases, but I defended the companies. So I know people who do this get a bad rap, but I actually loved what I did, and I got a lot of great lawyering experience. I started working on substantive motions my first year out of law school. I was writing motions for summary judgment, where all my friends were in the basement reviewing docs. I had great mentors. I got to fly around the eastern part of the United States taking depositions. I actually ran, and this probably wasn't until 7 years in, but I ran an entire consumer product recall campaign with the CPSC by myself. My niche was working with scientific experts, so I did a lot of work with toxicologists, hydrogeologists, weathermen, who basically were my teachers, which I needed because I honestly have not taken a science class since advanced bio junior year with Margie Clark-Cavan. So somehow I ended up as a scientific litigator, but it was because I had great teachers. And that's really been a theme in my life, is surrounding myself with great teachers, both teachers from schools and then people in the world who can teach me things. I'm always learning, always grateful for teachers. So anyway, my other employer, besides so that was actually my law firm picture. I was trying to look all kinds of tough, everyone back in the day posed with your arms crossed. So that was me as a young lawyer. Then my other employer was the US court system. Now in DC, both the courts are in the E. Pretty Min Federal Courthouse. So there I am in front of the courthouse. This is the court you've probably seen on the news lately. They actually, funny story, there used to be a lot more of the streaking underneath that, and the judges were like, hey, building services people, you need to like clean up the building because it's like showing up on the news and it looks really bad when we have all the streaks under the letters. So shortly after I graduated from law school, I worked as what's called a term law clerk to a woman, Judge Collier, on the US District Court for DC. And then the rest of the time has been with Justice Jackson. In October, we're actually going to have our 10-year anniversary. So I'm joking with her that she's like the longest relationship I've ever had. So looking back over my career, it's so interesting to me that I can kind of pinpoint the moments where there were forks in the road, where if I had made a different choice, I wouldn't be where I am today. I mentioned Miss Margolis and kind of picking where I was going to go to college. And then from there, I went on to Georgetown. And then when I was at Georgetown, I was deciding which law firm to work at. And one of my study group friends, there's this whole process where you put in bids and you match, and it's kind of like, I guess, sorority rush almost like. But one of my friends in study group said, oh, my boyfriend Steve works at this firm called Crowell & Mooring. He really likes it. You should put a bid in. Like, okay, sure. So I did. And I got an offer there, and I got some other offers. So when it came time to decide where I was going to work after graduation, I was out at a bar with my study group friends and Steve, and he said, you know, if you accept Crowell's offer tonight, I will buy everybody's drinks. And I didn't want to let my friends down, and they were all they were all phenomenal offers. Like, I couldn't go wrong, whatever I chose. So I was like, okay. So I ended up working at Crowell & Mooring. And it was there, I started working in the labor and employment group. And I worked on some matters with this female attorney who was a labor law powerhouse. She was the former general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. She had been the former chair of the Federal Mine Health Safety and Review Commission. She was the first woman to be a managing partner of a DC law firm. This woman was Rosemary Collier, who would go on to be appointed by the first President Bush to be on the US District Court for the District of Columbia. And she's the person that I went on to clerk for that 20-month period. So my clerkship with her ended, I went back to the law firm, and after like 9 years, I decided I need a change. My kids were little, both of them were diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, and I was tired of traveling, client development, Sunday evening conference calls with the other part-time moms, because we would have a conference call after all our kids went to bed. And I can't, and billing my life in 6-minute increments. That was the bane of my existence, the billing your life in 6-minute increments. So I called Rosemary/Judge Collier, and I set up a lunch. And I told her I was looking for an off-ramp. And she said, well, there's this woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson. President Obama has nominated her for a spot on the district court. You should send her a letter and offer to be her career clerk when she gets confirmed. Like, you know all about working for a baby judge. She called herself a baby judge. I'm not insulting her. And so I did. And I got back this lovely letter that said, thank you so much, but I've decided to hire term clerks. I'll keep your materials on file, and if I ever decide to switch to a career clerk, I'll give you a call. And so I'm like, okay, well, that didn't go anywhere. But then 6 months later, in October of 2013, she did change her mind. And when she offered me this job, she needed someone immediately, so I gave 2 days' notice at the law firm. And I have worked for her ever since. Everyone's kind of muttering. I'm actually still really on good terms with these people. I had lunch with like 3 separate partners at the firm even like over the years, and most recently a couple months ago. They kind of don't want to make federal judges mad because they litigate in federal courts. And then, like, even though this is even better now, because look where we ended up. So at the district court, I was the career law clerk, which meant that I was a law clerk working on a portion of her docket of cases, and I was also her administrative assistant, kind of running her life. And then when she was elevated to the US Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit, my title changed to judicial assistant, but I still divided my time between legal and administrative work. Now at the Supreme Court, I really don't do any legal work at all. My title is Senior Judicial Assistant, and I assist. I've been told that my job is kind of akin to a chief of staff. I manage her calendar, plan all her trips, respond to all of her invitations, work with the building on renovating our office space, etc. I basically run her life as a justice. It is a busy job for sure, but it honestly is a dream come true, and I get to walk into the Supreme Court building every day and kind of look up and around at these gorgeous, marble floors and ceilings and columns, and really I'm in wonder at how I got here. And so I think it's safe to say that no other person has had the job experience that I had. I have worked for one judicial official at 3 levels of our federal court system, and I've supported her through 2 separate confirmation processes. So that's why I figured I would talk a little about federal courts and the confirmation process. So real quick, so there are 3 levels to our federal court system. At the bottom we have the district courts, in the middle we have the circuit courts of appeal, and then at the top that we have the Supreme Court. Now the district courts have both civil and criminal cases. And my family can't answer this because I asked them last night. Does anybody know how many district courts there are in the country? Anyone? No? That's the circuit courts. That's going to be my next question. But so there are 94 district courts, plus the Court of International Trade and the Court of Federal Claims. You got the 13 circuits. There are the 11 numbered circuits, the DC Circuit, and the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And then 1 Supreme Court. All right. So federal courts in the federal system. So we have the United States District Court for the District of New Hampshire. There's a lovely picture of the building. That is in Concord. Does anyone know what circuit, federal appellate circuit, where New Hampshire is in? Right. We're in the First Circuit. Now the fun question. Does anyone else know which other courts are in the First Circuit? Yep, Massachusetts. Puerto Rico. That is the one. I'm like, somebody wanted somewhere nice to go in the winter because we have the New England states and Puerto Rico. I'm looking forward to when Puerto Rico has its conference because I think we can manage to book a trip down there. But yeah. So just a very kind of brief overview. So federal courts in the federal system, there are actually so many classes in law school that teach you about federal courts in the federal system. When you start out, you take civil procedure, your first year, court course, criminal procedure. I actually took as an elective 3rd year federal courts in the federal system. And so everything I say tonight is going to be very general. There's exceptions and then there's crazy rules, but I really just wanted to give you a feel so that when you see something on the news or you read something on social media that you can kind of have an idea of what they're talking about when they are talking about the federal court system. So when we start off in district court, people file a complaint on the civil side. Once it's served on the defendant, you can either have the defendant has to respond to the complaint. That can either be in the form of a motion to dismiss or an answer. So you kind of go down 2 separate paths. If you end up denying the motion to dismiss, then you go back into the middle again, and you have a period called discovery. Discovery is where each side will exchange all the information. You can ask the other side for all the information they know about your case. You have these various tools. Discovery can be, as a litigator, kind of annoying. You have these interrogatories where they basically will ask you a question and say something like, describe, all the events that happened back to 1930 that injured my client. Very annoying to respond to. But that's why you litigate it. In the discovery process, you also came into my area of expertise, which were expert witnesses. You would work with expert witnesses. They would draft reports. You would have depositions. They would be going back and forth. I had people in depositions, one guy, I always went in and no one kind of realized I was a lawyer. They either thought I was a secretary or a court reporter or legal assistant. So I was in a deposition once, and this guy, this famous litigator was pacing back and forth, doing what felt like a closing argument in the deposition. He's just walking, and at the end he just stops, and I'm like, was there a question there? I don't know what happened. And he's, yeah, I'm not intimidated by your little posturing there. The thing to know also about litigation in federal courts is that federal courts are courts of limited jurisdiction. So they only have jurisdiction in cases where Congress has actually given it to them, or if it is a case that arises under the Constitution. So you could have a car accident case. And there are certain circumstances where you can actually bring a car accident case in federal court. The parties have to be citizens of different states, and the amount in controversy has to be over the statutory amount, which right now is $75,000. And we actually had a case come in, and I screened all the cases at the start for the now justice to kind of make sure that everyone had dotted their I's and crossed their T's when they filed their complaint. And some lawyer in federal court filed a car accident case. I'm like, okay, citizens of different state, no problem. And the amount that they pled was $75,000. I was like, yeah, no, this case is out of here because of 1 cent. Because it had to be $75,000 and 1 cent for the court to have jurisdiction over it. So that was a very expensive mistake by the Lord. At the end of discovery, you can either have summary judgment or a trial. Trials occur, the function of a jury trial is that they are finders of fact. They're not the arbiter of the law, they find the facts. So when there are disputes of material fact, that's when you go to the jury. When it's a question of who said what and what happened, the jury decides those disputes. The judge is the one that's gonna say what the law is. So if there's no disputes about facts and it's all legal mumbo jumbo that they're fighting about, then the cases can be resolved at summary judgment. But for purposes of going on to the next stage of litigation, it's the judgment that is important. Similar thing with criminal cases. We start out and we either have an indictment or an arraignment. Arraignment is with a not arraignment, that was a mistake. Indictment or an information, I apologize. Indictment is when you have the grand jury. Information is when the person has been working with the U.S. Attorney's Office and they're likely gonna plea. So the information is how you kind of get the case started, and then it will most likely be resolved by a plea. Defendants have a constitutional right and a statutory right to a speedy trial. Typically that by statute, they're supposed to go to trial within 70 days of certain events, and you can restart the clock by certain things, but it's the 70-day limit. This can be told either by consent or when parties file certain motions. But eventually you get to the point where you have either a plea or a trial, same kind of thing. Trial is when there are, issues of fact, and then after the plea, you'll have a sentencing. Sentencing in the federal system usually actually take a while. You're not gonna go immediately from a trial guilty verdict to a sentencing. We have an office called the probation office that actually does what's called a pre-sentence report, where they go and they interview the defendant and their family, and they pull together a whole history and tell us, what are the statutory maximums and minimums and what the fine is and if there are any mitigating circumstances. And they also do a calculation of under the federal sentencing guidelines, which are advisory guidelines that have all these inputs that go into them that can tell you what the recommended sentencing range should be. And so after all that is done, then you get your final judgment. And it's those final orders which allow you to go on to the next step, which are the federal courts of appeal. Now, like I said, there are exceptions. There's certain times where it's not a final thing where you can still go on, but that's things like preliminary injunctions or whatnot. But mainly you need final orders because we don't want piecemeal litigation. The federal system does not like having appeals go up on only part of the case so that you can come back down and litigate some more. Unlike what you see on Law and Order, this drives me crazy whenever I see it. When you're in the appeals court, you're not going to be presenting facts. Everything is on the papers. You have to go back and look at the record. And the record is like the briefs that were filed, the transcripts of the arguments, all the evidence in the record. And from that, you're going to construct legal arguments that you're going to present to the judges. You're not going to show up at the hearing and be like, hey, I have this witness, let them tell you why the trial court finding is wrong. Not going to happen. Typically, cases are heard by a 3-judge panel, which, at least in the DC Circuit, randomly selected. Just like at the district court, cases are assigned based on a random basis. After the 3-judge panel issues their decision, you can seek what's called en banc review, which means you file a petition asking the court as a whole to hear your case. Those, at least in the DC Circuit, rarely granted. So usually after the 3-judge panel rules, that's the end of your case. And that is then the next step in the system when you're going up would be the Supreme Court. So this is a picture of the courtroom from the public area. So there's like they have the doors open, this right here is a little bar that you're not supposed to go past. And those are the public seats in the back, and you can see the justices' benches. My justice sits on the far right. It's all seniority order, so it kind of goes back and forth. So she's the most junior, so she's furthest over on the right. All right, go on. Why are you, oh, sorry. Oh, why is my thing not liking me? Okay. Sorry. I don't know why it went back. Next page. There we go. So when you get to the Supreme Court, Brad actually asked me at dinner, how do you get to the Supreme Court? How do you get them to hear your case? And it is through a process called a petition for a writ of certiorari. And cases come up either through the federal system that we just discussed, or they can also come up through the state court system. If there is a case, an example I can think of is a criminal case where you would have a defendant saying that the police violated my constitutional rights in the arrest process. That would raise a federal question so that you could bring it up on a petition for a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court. There are about, I think last year we probably had about 5,000 petitions filed. And the court obviously does not hear all those cases. They usually pick, right now I think it's probably about 50 to 60 that they're gonna hear. And so that process, what happens is to get to it, they have, there are 7 justices right now that participate in something called the cert pool, which is a process by which the petitions will be divided amongst the law clerks of the various chambers. So each petition will first be reviewed by one law clerk in the 7 chambers who will make a recommendation on how to proceed with respect to that petition. And then the various justices decide from there exactly what they're gonna do, how they're gonna use the pool memo and how they're gonna vote on a petition. In the process of doing this review of all the petitions, there is what's called a discuss list that's created. So each justice can decide to put a case on the list. There's basically, they have batches that they're going to be up for consideration at a particular conference, which is the meeting where the justices meet. So they can add a case to the discuss list. And so when they add it to the discuss list, the justice will actually talk about it at conference and decide whether or not to vote, will vote on whether or not to grant the cert petition. If no justice places a case on the discuss list, it goes on what's called the dead list, which means that cert has been denied. And actually, when I was doing some research for this case, the process actually used to be kind of the opposite, which is that they listed the cases that they didn't want to hear, like they created the list of no's before they did the yeses, and now at some point in time it got switched. Anyway, it takes 4 votes to grant a cert petition, and the cases in which cert is granted, they're put on what's called an order list, and that is usually released the Monday after a conference. Conferences typically take place on Fridays, and so the Monday after in the morning is when they will release the list of cases that they are adding to their docket. Once a petition is granted, briefing on the merits will follow, and the case will be set for oral argument. When it's set for oral argument, the court will set a time that says, okay, each side's gonna have 20 minutes to argue. They never last 20 minutes. Everything pretty much runs over. The current practice will be that counsel will have 2 minutes to speak uninterrupted before the justices will chime in and start asking questions. And at the end of the argument, the chief will actually go down through all the justices in seniority order to ask if they have any additional questions. And then in that argument process, arguing counsel can actually reserve time for rebuttal so that they could come back and argue some more afterward. At some point in the days following the conference, the justices will meet and they'll discuss privately how to resolve the cases. And the justice with the most seniority in the group of the majority justices will actually be the one who decides which of those justices is going to write the case. Draft decisions are circulated court-wide to all the justices, and each justice will decide if they will join that decision, write separately as a concurrence, or dissent. And sometimes that decision is going to depend on what happens in response to comments. So sometimes the memos will actually, they write back and forth memos about this. Everything is done in paper, which is tradition, so yeah. This is the thing that's really struck me since I joined the court is the formality of the process. So if my boss wants to join a decision that another justice has drafted, be on her letterhead, it'll say, "Dear Chief, please join me. Sincerely, Katanji." And they circulate that. And that's how you join. And they, like, our aide photocopies it, puts it in an envelope, walks it around to all the chambers, and that is, and there's also an electronic system as well, but they still maintain this paper process where everything is hand-delivered and walked around. And then once the decisions are drafted and ready for release, there is this whole back-end process running checks to make sure that all the citations are accurate and that it's in the proper Supreme Court style and that there's no typos. And this, I think, has been one of the hardest things for my boss to understand, because back in the day, she's used to just being the judge in charge. 8 years she was on the district court. She's like, I want the decision to go out on this day, law clerks make it happen. That does not happen anymore when you have 3 different offices, and plus all the other justices that you're dealing with. And you also have to leave time because they actually print copies of the decisions. So once you get everything finished and everybody signed off and run all the checks, the reporter's office actually has to print out the physical copies that they hand out to reporters from the office on the day decisions are handed down, which are exciting days, decision days. The justices will actually, the majority author will draft a brief summary called a bench statement that they will read from the bench. And while the arguments in general are now live streamed, the bench statements are not, except one day when they messed up and actually when my boss read her first bench statement, they actually streamed it. And we were like, wow, we didn't realize that was gonna happen. Sometimes the dissenting or concurring justices will also read bench statements. That doesn't happen as often. Most of the decisions are handed down on days when the court is already scheduled to hear arguments. They hear arguments from October to June. They hear arguments from October to the end of March. And so on argument days, they sometimes start off by handing down decisions. At the end of the year, they have days which are just decision and bar admission sessions. And at the end, they oftentimes will add days in the last week of June because they have so many opinions left and they need to get it done. The goal of the Supreme Court is to be done by the end of June because everybody basically leaves the building come July 1st. The argument schedule is set and publicly released in advance. You can go on the Supreme Court website right now and see all the argument days that are set. It's usually 2 weeks of argument and then 2 weeks off. But 2 weeks off aren't really 2 weeks off because then you're just preparing for the next session of arguments and then also working on the decisions that you've been assigned from the last period of arguments. Anyway. So it is crazy, and having been there now for a year, I can see why the justices want to be done by July and leave for the summer. Oh yes, there's the emergency docket as well. So those are typically death penalty cases, so they receive all the petitions seeking when someone's going to be executed. There's actually an attorney in the clerk's office who is solely the death penalty clerk, which must be a really, really hard job. Who tracks all the executions. We have them all calendared. We know what's coming up and deals with those emergency filings. And then there's also now the emergency filings that everyone's seen in the news where someone will come in and say that they need immediate action. And those, you kind of drop everything and deal with those cases. Okay, the fun stuff. And I'll go through this quickly because I want to leave time for questions. Selecting and confirming federal judges. My kids love Madagascar. And so they have this step 1, step 2, step 3 about how they're gonna get the people from the casino. So I've kind of done step 1, get on the White House's list. I honestly don't know how my boss made it onto the list of people that the White House was considering both for the Circuit Court and for the Supreme Court. I mean, I know what you all know. I know what I saw in the news, but I actually hadn't sat down and discussed with the many folks I dealt with at the White House about how she got on. And then you have to make it to the top of the list. And a big part of this initial process is filling out the questionnaire. And the first time I got this, it's 26 questions. I'm like, oh, no big deal. You like go through name, like history, and then you like get into it. And you have to list, and my boss like does a lot of events. She's done a lot of events in the past. So you have to list like every event you've ever spoken at. Give them copies of every speech you've ever given, like dating back to high school. It's a lot. So when we did it for the Supreme Court, and also, there was one where you had to list all of the decisions she ever drafted, and on the district court, she had over 600. So her Senate Judicial Questionnaire for the Supreme Court was 149 pages, which I read many, many times for typos, and otherwise to make sure that it was accurate. Because, as I'm sure you saw on the news, there is so much scrutiny of this. And it was really, really hard for me because I'm working on this on the back end. I've told her often that my job is to make her life easier. And I never want to do anything that's going to end up where she's going to look bad or be on the news or have some kind of mistake. And so when I'm going through this, I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to make sure that I have every single event that I flagged for her to make sure it's on. Because I didn't want a situation where someone was going to do some web search and be like, oh, she spoke at this one event on this one day at this other school. Why didn't you list it? What are you trying to hide? And then it becomes this whole kerfluffle. So that was very stressful. The other part of it was that it was a very confidential process. People in the office at certain times, my coworkers, didn't know what I was working on. She and I were the only people in chambers who knew at certain points that she was under consideration. So I'm dealing with all this stress. And then I'm like, I can't talk to anyone about it. I'm sitting and my son Adam is like, Mom, why are you coming home so late? And it's just kind of like, yeah, buddy, I had to work late. So it was a very enriching time, but it was also very, very hard and stressful. And then step 3, the fun part, the Senate confirmation. It was very different between the Circuit Court and the Supreme Court. For the Circuit Court, my boss did not meet with a single senator. She had a hearing that was a morning, and she was on a panel with another judge who was up for a circuit position. And actually, most of the questions actually went to this other judge, which was kind of nice. And this was during COVID, so we were watching remotely. But one of the things that really surprised me that I didn't know was that the senators actually don't stay for the whole confirmation hearing. They ask their questions that they want to ask, and then they leave. So we were watching the things, live streaming it, and I'm like, why is everybody asking her the same question? Do these people have memory issues? Like, what is going on here? And it was because nobody was staying. So they asked her like 6 different times, like how being a federal public defender in her past would impact her judging in the future. Which in some way, looking back on it, that's great. Like she can give the same answer over and over again and not have to worry about tripping up on something else. So when she did the Supreme Court, she met with 98 of 100 senators. She met with all the members of the Judiciary Committee before her confirmation hearing. Her nomination was announced on February 28th. Her confirmation hearing was March 21st, which meant that we had to cram and prep for all the questions that she was going to be asked, all the while meeting with the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee and various other senators. Some of her Senate meetings actually took place after the confirmation hearings, but it was a crazy 3 weeks. She didn't have a day off between studying for everything. When I would go, I would show up to the district court at about 7, and I would ride with her marshal detail up the hill to get ready for these meetings. And then we would be there until 6 at night. Then we would go back to the court and then be studying until late at night. And then she would wash, rinse, repeat, and do it again for all the days leading up to the confirmation hearing. One of the things she says was most surprising was the life-changing moment which is the morning after she is being announced at the conference. I have so many stories I could tell, and I'm running out of time, but I will say the marshals showed up in my office. Well, first off, they showed up, and I'm like, how in the heck did you get in here? Because this door is locked, and I look up from my desk, and there's like 3 very burly men like standing in front of me going, I need to speak to your boss. And I'm like, I don't know who you are. But so she had a marshal detail. They drove her everywhere. From that moment. Her husband and I had to figure out how to get her car home from the court the day after the announcement happened, because she drove in. And yeah, she didn't drive after that for many, many, many months. So we had the detail of people, which you can see kind of the back of some of them, driving her around everywhere. They took her to the grocery store. They took her to get her nails done. Anything and everything, the marshals were there, standing at the end of the aisles, with their little earpieces in, kind of looking, mad and tough. So we actually had the hearing. So I said she testified for 2 days. You can see here, this was the setup. Because it was during COVID, they were still all spread out. Republicans were on that side, Democrats were on this side. They kind of still did the back and forth of questioning. We had seats on the floor, so you can see here I was in the second row sitting on the floor. We also had skybox seats, so you can see on the other side, like a skybox, but this was kind of the view from above when we had the confirmation hearing. It was kind of pretty awesome. This is over here, this is my crew of people who, clerks who were working to support her on the process. While we were there at the confirmation hearing, we were basically camped out in the vice president's office space and one of the Senate office buildings. So we took a little break. So there's the justice and her husband on a break in between sessions. It was just crazy. The other thing that was kind of, you can listen to, there's the White House, when they called her to tell her that she was going to be the nominee, there's a recording on Instagram and YouTube, whatever, that the White House released of it. And I can tell you that the surprise and the joy that you will hear on that call is genuine. We were actually convinced that it wasn't going to be her, because the president had said that he was going to announce by the 28th. And it's literally like 6 o'clock on the 28th. And we're like, oh, okay, well, not going to be her. She gets the call, and we're excited. And we're like, yay, she's the nominee. And then also, like, yay, she was supposed to have a hearing the next morning. She was supposed to hear arguments on the DC circuit. She's thinking, great, I don't have to do this hearing. I'm going to be the nominee. And the White House is like, yeah, no, you got to do the argument. Because they weren't going to announce it until 10, and the hearing started at 9:30. And so if she didn't show up on the Zoom screen, people were gonna know what was up. So she still had to go home and not only write her speech, but continue preparing for the hearing that was scheduled for the next morning, all the while kind of comprehending that her life was going to change immensely. To be confirmed for the Supreme Court, you have to be voted out of committee. And for her, because there was an evenly divided committee, she actually had to get a floor vote because they tied at the committee, so then it had to go on the floor vote to get it out of committee. And then there was actually the actual congressional session, because it was tied. Kamala Harris actually had to cast the tie-breaking vote. So we actually, the chair gave us tickets, and we were up with there were 10 of us from her staff, former clerks, were sitting in the balcony, and we were all just being so quiet, because they're like, you must be quiet. And then it happened, and then the senators were the ones who started the cheering, and I was like, wow, I didn't know this. And Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is kind of going like this, gently tapping, oh, order, really? I'm gonna turn this car around, but not for a couple minutes. Shortly after that, we actually got to go to the White House, where the justice mentioned me. It was pretty cool to walk through the rose garden and the portico and out onto the lawn to sit on the seats. This was the selfie that she sent. Joe Biden actually took her phone and was like, we're taking a selfie. And so she sent me that before it ended up on Instagram. A couple things to know. So this is one of the conference rooms at the court, fanciest conference room you have ever seen in your life. But this was set up for her swearing in. I had to go, it was like a wedding. I had to put people in seats. And so I was taking pictures of where people were sitting to make sure that Uncle Bob and Aunt Sue, who didn't like each other, didn't end up sitting next to each other. Fun fact about the Supreme Court is that they actually have a cabinet maker shop that builds furniture and bookcases and maintains all the original furniture from the building. So this is her actually directly after she had gotten sworn in. We were in temporary chambers, but they made her door plate. And so when we came back from the swearing in, we walked into the thing and her door plate was there. And I was like, oh, I need to take a picture. Oh, here's just more fun stuff. So yeah, I travel with her. These are me and the two in the middle are actually members of the Supreme Court Dignitary Protection Unit, which are her security now that travels with her everywhere. She is allowed to drive now under certain circumstances, but so I've traveled with her. She, like, up there was when we actually were in Boston for a commencement address, so working on the plane. She did a charity run. I didn't do it because at that point I had a badly sprained ankle. But yeah, so with one of her security guards, they were like, be incognito. And so she was, and then she had like the men in black surrounding her, looking all kinds of serious. Didn't quite work. She is one of the hardest working people I have ever met. And she will tell you that's one thing that's gotten her very far in life. So she was giving a commencement address. That one was at BU. And so she's in the room in her robe working on her speech up until the last minute. And you can see her there. I was off to the side, but giving her speech, all kinds of fun. So she's the head of the cafeteria committee, which means I am on the cafeteria committee. And we're getting a new contractor right now, so it's taking up a lot of my time. But we had an employee barbecue, and she like flipped burgers and donned the robe, which was actually a lot of fun. That's our chamber's aide, Madison, the one who runs around all the papers. This is kind of our big room. In the middle is the big room in the office that we work in, where two of the clerks sit and our aide sits. And she comes in there and talks and works on cases and talks about things that are happening, and it's really a great space. And the last one, that was kind of fun. We had a Vogue shoot with Annie Leibovitz on the steps of the Lincoln. So I got up really early one morning, and so I'm taking a picture of Annie Leibovitz, taking a picture of my boss. And I'm so sorry that I'm keeping everyone late from the reception, but I thank you so much for paying attention and listening, and I welcome any questions.
Standing ovation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, and I will be at the heading over, but
let's do this. Our tradition usually is to end right at 9, but I imagine some of you might have a few questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Our tradition is that we normally end right at 9 o'clock, but I suspect you have a few questions for her. So let's give it 5 minutes here, and then we can move everything over to the reception area. If you have a question, just raise your hand. There's one right there.
Awesome.
Start.
Hi. Thank you.
I'm going to speak imperfectly, but I just wanted to understand your kind of perspective on the leaking of the reversal of Roe v. Wade and whether or not there were controls then put in place to what extent that would happen.
Yep. Thank you for that question. He was asking about the leak of Roe v. Wade and whether there have been any controls that have been put in place after that. So I was, despite what some people on Twitter had theorized when they said it was Justice Jackson or her staff who leaked it, I actually wasn't in the building then, even though my boss had actually been, I think she had been confirmed, or at some point, I was still working with her. I was her only staffer at that point, working at the DC court, kind of preparing for the transition. And so I don't know things that have changed because I have only ever worked at the court in a post-leak world. I have heard from people that it was a very tough time at the court with all the questioning and kind of the suspicion that was kind of, floating around with everyone. So unfortunately, I don't really know. I know that, we have procedures in place to kind of prevent leaks. I mean, we have, kind of separate systems on the court so that you have, an internal system which hopefully stays in charge, and it's been like that for years. Actually, my boss, she clerked there in '99 and told me, back in the day, none of the computers were connected to the internet. And if you wanted to go online, they had one terminal in the middle of the room that you had to go and type on. But yeah, I don't know what has changed, because I'm only there in the new world, to the extent it's new. Oh, hi.
Mine's an easy one. You mentioned that the vice president needed to vote to break the tie, but several Republicans voted to.
Oh, wait a minute. I apologize. You are right. I missed that one. You are right. I'm so sorry. You are totally correct. She did not have to vote to break the tie. I think she had to vote to break the tie maybe, was it earlier on? Because she had 2 votes. Anyway, you are correct. I misspoke. I apologize. No, thank you for correcting that. There was the worry. I mean, that was always the worry, is that you had to make sure that everybody got there. And actually, at the committee level, one of the senators, because it was evenly divided and you had to have each vote, they actually, when it came time for the committee to vote, they held the start of the hearing because the senator from California, I think his flight got delayed. And so it was supposed to start at one point in time, but they couldn't start without him because they didn't have his vote. She wouldn't get out of committee, and then we never would have gotten anywhere. But I apologize. You are correct. They got Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski were the 3 votes. Yep. All right. Any people are like, let's eat. Thank you.
Don't go far.
All right. Oh my God.
So I understand that Washington, D.C. is a very sophisticated city, and you can get pretty much anything you want at the markets, but there's a shortage of maple syrup there. So we'd like to present you with this half-gallon of maple syrup, which is our tradition,
Oh, I am so
as a way of
excited.
saying thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you. I actually bought some maple syrup today, a smaller amount. I'm so excited. My kids use this so much.
So that ends the evening here on stage. Please join us next door for the reception. It's a great opportunity to meet Jen and ask her some more questions and have some light refreshments. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thanks for a great summer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Did you okay? Okay. Oh.
The Amos Fortune Forum is now adjourned.